Are you talking the same walk at home as well as out in public? Do you treat your family the same way you treat your friends or random people you encounter as you go through life? Now, I know that intro sounds backwards. Normally, we talk about walking the talk, not talking the walk. But it was actually intentional, and the reason will become clear later in this video. In a previous video I did last year, I drew some comparisons between two funerals I attended in 1 week. The first was my Uncle David in Dublin. I live streamed that one, and the second was for my wife's niece, and we were physically attending that one. In that video, I compared the content, the styles of the funeral, and also referenced my father's funeral from a few years ago. There were aspects of all three funerals that were similar, and others that were very different. Not just in the way each service was structured, but also what was said and not said, and by whom. Now, a couple of weeks ago, my Aunt Mary died from pancreatic cancer. It was not a surprise, and I know she did her level best to try and beat it, but to no avail. Now, she was not a young woman, and that particular cancer is a bit of a bastard. Despite the care she received and the treatment programs she endured, it hit hard and fast and was too much for her in the end. A few days before she passed away, Mary announced on Facebook exactly what she was facing and that she did not think she had much time left. A few days later, her husband, Peter, announced on her Facebook page that she had finally passed and the details of her funeral service would be coming soon. The reaction to these posts were about what you would expect. Lots of expressions of sorrow, warmth, love, and well wishes by people who knew Mary and Peter. Now, I didn't respond to her initial announcement on Facebook. Rather, I recorded a private video on my channel and sent her the link to it. It was a personal message from me to her and included some advice on what I thought she should try to do in preparation for passing. There was nothing drastic or conflicting with her beliefs, but just some things I thought she could do in her head as well as physically, if she was able to. Her funeral service was a Catholic one held in a small chapel in Tasmania and live streamed. The attendance was perhaps a couple of dozen people, and I know a number of friends and family connected to that live stream. The funeral company did a nice job organising it, hosting the stream, providing the memorial booklet online, and including a tributes page where people could leave messages in lieu of attending the service. So, reading through the tributes, it was very similar to reading the reactions on Facebook, all warm and fuzzy. As part of the service, we listened to her eulogy and learned a bunch of things about her, about some of the significant points in her life, etc. Her brothers and sister in Dublin sent quite a bit of content that was read out, starting with the fact that they were all under strict doctor's orders not to travel as they were all very ill, but included some memories of her younger years and early relationships. Interestingly, they did nothing of the sort for their brother Noel, my dad, when he passed away 5 years ago. Now, I know Dad was not really close to his brothers and sisters, and this was perhaps reflected in the fact that they passed on their condolences, but little more, while they felt compelled to share some memories of their sister upon her passing. For someone who has no idea who Mary was, the overwhelming impression from Facebook and everything around her funeral service was that she was a warm, loving, generous, and kind to everyone who knew her. This is the talk she walked when around friends in public. However, sadly, this was not the talk she walked when talking to the Australian branch of her family. I won't regurgitate all the details of my experiences with her over the 30 years or so she was in Australia, but it is a matter of history to say that many of our beliefs and attitudes did not align very well at all. While Dad made it possible for Mary to live in Australia through his sponsorship and assistance in getting her a place to live, something that was not mentioned at her funeral, their relationship contained a lot of tension and quite a lot of arguments. While alcohol played a large part in all of that, the negativity that came out of both of them seemed to be a family trait that all the children, both here and in Dublin, seem to persist with. From my own experience, I rarely enjoyed talking with my dad as he got older because simply there was never anything nice coming out of his mouth. I know he was proud of his children and would regularly say so, but you didn't want to ask him how he was doing because he would tell you. Basically, he died in 1991 but didn't stop breathing until 2018. That is no way to live, and not something anyone wants to hear about all the time. However, out in public, he was polite, friendly, and well spoken. The talk he walked at home was not the talk he walked out in public. So it was with Mary. I didn't like speaking to her because we seemed to have the same conversation each time. She would call me late in the afternoon or early evening, usually after having more than a few drinks. She would complain that I didn't contact her without wanting to understand that I'm still working, raising a family, and dealing with all the stuff that I deal with both at work and at home. And for months after Dad died, she would complain about what I said at his funeral with respect to the relationship between him and his mother. It was very different between her and her mother, and it took several repetitions explaining that it had nothing to do with her or her mother, but everything to do with Dad. Now, while Mary lived in Australia essentially for the entire second half of her life, I got the impression that her mind was very fixed on the Dublin of her childhood. She refused to let go of the past and embrace the culture of the place she actually lived in. Where this got frustrating for me was the fact that she felt it critical that I also embrace that part of my family history and push it all onto my children. I think I explained to her once that I have the right to choose which parts of my family legacy I want to allow to persist through the family line and which parts I choose to leave behind in the country where they belong. It's something that Dad chose when he emigrated to Australia and left the violence of his childhood behind. I think that concept of choice melted her brain a bit and she would have none of it. Regardless of where she was on her tours around Australia before COVID, I think her mind was stuck in an Irish pub somewhere in Dublin with a musician in the corner singing Danny Boy. It's a stereotype, I know, but it's what comes to mind. By comparison, I've sat on a 500 million year old rock in the bottom of a gorge in complete silence, except for the chattering of the bird life and insects. If you still your mind and be present for a moment in a place like that, you can almost hear the deep drone of a didgeridoo shimmering in the 30-degree air. Again, is it a stereotype? Maybe, but I've experienced that. Now, while I did not like my aunt or some of the choices she made, I never bore her any ill will. Likewise, I don't bear her husband Peter any ill will at all. He loved and served his wife as much as he could for all of their time together, and that should absolutely be commended. It's very common to hear people talking badly about their husband or wife, or even to complete strangers. But I never heard him sledge his wife once, and along with his unconditional love and care for her, it speaks massively of his character as a man. And when I set out to record my thoughts on Aunt Mary, her funeral, and the differences between my experiences with her compared to her friends and loved ones, particularly in Peter's family, it was never my intention just to sit here and dump crap on her. Like Dad, she was a product of a time in post-war Dublin, and that was anything but peaceful. And the attitudes on raising children back then may not have given much thought about the kind of people those children would grow into and become. I look back on my own life, and I know while it was better than the generation that went before me, it wasn't until I had the opportunity in the last 20 years to associate with people doing life at a higher level and helped me become the kind of man I am today. I do try to talk the walk at home the same way I do in public. I edify my wife, I talk her up in every opportunity. I love her and I serve her. I know I have a certain amount of influence just because I'm the bloke in the house And so I try and pass it on to not just my kids, but their friends as well. So, when they come around, they talk to me about whatever. Um, and I'm very mindful of the expectation on me to pass that influence that I have on to not only my kids, but their friends as well. And when I'm done, I'll leave the planet a little bit better than it was when I got here. So there you have it. Just some thoughts and reflections from me and what my relationship with my Aunt Mary was like. I know my brothers have a similar sentiment um, for the same reason. We did not get on that well. We are just very, very different people. And my brothers and I, yeah, she was not always a very nice person, was not always very well spoken to us. Um, that's just who she was, and that's what we had to deal with. So, but, there you go.